Welcome. Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles, and welcome to at Family Office TV, old school podcasters on Spotify, Apple, and others, Angelo Robles podcast, and for my members of SFO Continuity, a great welcome. Today, navigating the South Florida real estate boom, insights from residential office and industrial market experts. So I think we're all going to be interested in one of the hottest markets really since COVID is effectively South Florida. So the real estate opportunities and very dynamic. I don't think I've rarely had two guests on. I've never had three. So this is going to be a little bit of a challenge for me. But the good news for you is they're all different in their focus in South Florida real estate. We have Elliot Koolik, who's at Compass Boca, sharing his insights into luxury residential. Brian Gale of Cushman and Wakefield discusses the uniqueness of South Florida's office market. And a longtime friend, Jason Isaacson of IB Capital Partners, dives into industrial real estate. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Angelo.
Thank you. Thank you.
I
got offended for a second when you said old school. I thought you were talking about us, but you were just
talking
about the
I did too. Thank you, Jason. I got
That's very funny.
I'm the old man today among the four, so I'll take the mantle, show respect to your elders, gentlemen. We're going to start with Elliot. Elliot, what trends are you seeing, what I'm going to call in feeder markets that are driving relocation to Florida? And is it still continuing? Now we're a couple of years since it was really what we deem to be the hot point. What's contributing to this influx?
Well, I would say the normal reasons why people have typically migrated to South Florida are still, applicable. So obviously they're at a certain stage of their life. They want to get out of the cold. They're retiring. So that's still coming to Florida. What's kind of interesting is like the political climate in certain states have certainly caused people to reevaluate why they want to live there and are there other opportunities to live in markets where are more aligned with how they view the world. And then certainly having the nice weather and the lifestyle adds to that. So that's a big advantage of Florida. We have seen, over the years, we've always seen the tri-state area, which is New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, those areas, New England, Chicago, which is obviously Illinois, Maryland, that area always coming to Florida. And now we've seen, we never really had a migration from California. But we're starting a lot of high net worth people are leaving California, whether it's Southern California or Northern California, and are relocating to this area. And I think the fact that COVID allowed the whole ability to work remotely, and it became much more acceptable, is allowed people to kind of accelerate that process, where normally they were kind of anchored to where they live. Now we're seeing, that's helping the migration.
And Brian, we're going to go with you. It's a little bit similar, but obviously different real estate market and a slight twist on the question. What unique factors set the South Florida office market apart from other major, even hot, other U.S. markets?
Well, first and foremost, it's migration, right? We've had so much migration in the last, over 4.5 years now since COVID started, that really just changed everything. Miami is a small market, okay? And, there were the guys like the Relateds of the world have come down here, tried to pre-lease 400,000 to 500,000 square feet. They've realized that it really is a small tenant market. And I think an interesting stat, which shows you sort of how resilient the office market has been down here in South Florida, is we had over the first 4 years of COVID, so call it from 20 to the end of 23, we had 1.5 million square feet of new to market tenants actually sign leases, okay? And that may sound like a lot, it may not sound like a lot. If that was in New York City, one building would get leased, okay? But 1.5 million square feet in Miami means office rents in the core markets like Brickell doubled, okay? Went from 60 to over 120, 130, 190. We're even seeing a deal right now over $200 a foot. So the migration was real. It's slowed down a teeny bit since its peak of 21 and 22, but still much more than we saw pre-COVID. And so I think, as Elliot mentioned, they're coming down here for the reasons of, I think at first it was because of political reasons, was kind of, I think what happened in the very, very beginning of 20, people were just trying to make a statement like, I'm not dealing with this, I'm coming down here. But then when you start looking at the lack of state income tax and the quality of life and weather and all that, they realized that they really could be office down here. And so, yeah, the migration's been great, tailored off a teeny bit, but still a lot more than it was pre-COVID.
And Jason, what structural trends are driving sustained demand, I guess you could say, in industrial real estate, despite some of the economic slowdown?
Well, not to beat a dead horse or the same theme here, but the population and wealth migration are driving a lot of it, and our view is the combination of those two things create the most powerful economic force there is out there. And as it relates to industrial space, we're talking about consumption, because the way we consume now has changed dramatically, right? We used to consume by going to brick and mortar retail stores, buying our goods and bringing it home. Now those goods are delivered right to our rooftops. So as more and more goods are delivered to our rooftops in places of high population growth, and then augment that with places that not only do they have high population growth, but also wealthy population growth, you just have more consumption. So as distributors or retailers are looking, where are we going to put warehouses? They're putting more warehouses in areas of high population and wealth growth, because they need that product to be able to deliver goods to their consumers. And that's really what's driving demand for industrial space in Florida and frankly across the Southeast United States, where we've seen that type of growth.
And Jason, if you don't mind, I'm going to mix up the pattern a little bit so it
That's
stays
fine.
a little bit on our feet. You're actually next again. In the recent reshoring of manufacturing to the U.S., it's been relatively a long-term trend, or is it more, do you think, really just a temporary shift?
Well, you've got to divide it into manufacturing into two sectors. The United States is never going to be competitive in making sneakers and T-shirts and Lululemon sweatpants. We can't compete with foreign sources on those goods. Where we can compete and where we're a market leader is advanced manufacturing. And we've actually had, whether you like them or not, two major pieces of legislation passed recently. You've had the, I'll screw the name of it up, but the CHIPS Act, and then you had the Inflation Reduction Act, which both fed a lot of money to spur investments in advanced manufacturing. And the places we're seeing advanced manufacturing pop up is primarily in the Southeast and Sun Belt states, because we've got better labor, we've got more access to better labor because of population growth. And that's where we're seeing those advanced manufacturing hubs start to really kick up.
And Elliot, has the fancy way to ask it, has the influx of new residents began to slow? And what is the impact it's having on housing prices and inventory in South Florida? Let me restate that a little bit, make it really simple. It all comes down, like everything, to supply and demand. How is that playing out now in South Florida?
We're definitely starting. I mean, obviously it depends on what market you're looking at. I mean, there's definitely pockets where they're still, very, very thin as far as inventory. I would say overall inventory is still relatively low. It's not as scarce as it was a few years ago, which was very, very seller controlled the market. There's definitely more inventory hitting the market. And because of that, you're seeing, competition where sellers were kind of dictating the price to some degree. And I think rates had a big part of that. It was inexpensive to own those assets because rates were at 2.5% or 3%. Now, when they were approaching 8%, it was a little different. And then, it ticked down. Now that's ticked back closer to 7%. So we still have a little ways to go as far as inventory, as far as the interest rates. But as far as inventory, I think overall prices are holding pretty strong. Where a asset is commoditized and there's competition, then you're seeing a little bit of price compression. But in the higher end, the prices are holding firm, and in some cases going up.
And Brian, what makes the South Florida office market a compelling investment? So think of a wealthy person, a family office, looking at it from an investing perspective. So the macro, the micro environment, the economic environment, interest rates, and the perception from some that work from home, office space is not as valuable. Why is that not necessarily true, and the uniqueness is to the South Florida market?
Well, Elliot Management spent over $1 billion in the last 12 months on investing in South Florida, both giving working on a loan for 830 Brickell, coupled with the sale of 701 Brickell, and also some debt that they're doing with Related. So, I mean, there is a lot of money still pouring into South Florida. I'll give you an example of, you talk about Brickell Avenue being probably the best office market in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I say that from a perspective of not in terms of total market size or, total number of square feet of tenants. I say that just in terms of how the market has changed since COVID. It's more than doubled, right? So for instance, like a 701 Brickell, which recently just sold for just under $500 million. How many office buildings around the country are selling from $500 million, which was a $230 million profit, okay? What was interesting is you look at the rents that were currently in place for that building, okay? And you had average in-place rents of $68. We're currently doing deals between $130 and $140 a foot.
Wow.
So, I don't really care so much about where interest rates are right now. We know they're coming down. This was an all-cash purchase. Eventually, we'll get some debt put on the asset. But you want to talk about mark to market. I mean, every lease that's coming out of that building is going to more than double. So there are really good opportunities in South Florida. If you're looking at an investment, you got to look at that average in-place rent and see how much higher you can grow that. That's going to be an all-telling tale. But as long as we continue with the new-to-market tenants, rents will continue to escalate as they are. Even in sleepy markets, like downtown Miami right now is kind of a stagnant market. We're not really seeing absorption, but we are seeing rent growth. That's kind of the rising tide of the rest of the market. So I think there's some great opportunities right now to buy in South Florida. And in terms of the hybrid work, look, there's going to be certain companies where hybrid's going to stay forever. Amazon just recently mandated 5-day a week, which is huge because they're an influencer and they're a leader. And you'll start to see some other companies do that. So I think the work from home deal is starting to dissipate a little bit. I think you'll start to see more mandates coming to the office.
And I'm going to stay with you, Brian. You hinted at it already once or twice, but maybe diving deeper in for those looking or potentially investors, because the proximity of downtown Miami to Brickell, it's really close. You mentioned they're almost a world apart. And this goes to, again, supply and demand. But this really goes to the old adage of real estate: location, 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 even technically a mile or two apart. So the dynamics of Brickell, specifically that part of Brickell, appear to be through the roof. What's the next trend? Is when that gets priced out, is downtown going to explode? Is Collins Avenue? What's next in Miami office real estate?
So we've been predicting for quite some time now that it'll spring into downtown, right? A tenant who's paying $55 a square foot gets a renewal proposal at $120 a foot. That may not work for them. National's a little different, but sort of the smaller companies, that may not work. And so we actually thought that it would be almost a huge migration into downtown. What's happening real time is the tenants are saying, all right, if I'm not going to pay the Brickell rate, now I'm going to look at the whole market. Coral Gables has been on fire in the last year and a half. I mean, we've seen 25% increase in rents in the Coral Gables market. Coral Gables and Brickell used to have a $5 gap between the two. Then all of a sudden you turn around, it was $60. Like, what happened? People are like, what happened to Coral Gables? Nothing. You got executive housing, you got incredible buildings, beautiful residential in that area. Nothing bad happened. It was just Brickell took off because of the influx of new to markets that wanted to be there. Downtown has gotten a little piece of that, but a lot of the buildings there are kind of 80s vintage. There's been a lot of renovation of those buildings to try and compete for the flight to quality that we're seeing on a national level. But downtown was able to increase rents while not really absorbing any space. I think it's starting to change a little later than we thought because of the lack of availability of Class A space in Brickell. It's really only leaving the option, if you want to be in the CBD, to go and look at downtown.
And Jason, with the rise in warehouse developments, how can investors gain access to markets with understanding oversupply risk? Here we come again, supply and demand, versus those that may be poised for more stable growth in industrial.
One thing I want to just touch on, going back to office with Brian for a second, because we are an investor, and I feel like you have to whisper this when you say it, but while most of our portfolio is industrial these days, we do invest in office in Florida, primarily South Florida office. And I think that our theme on office investing in South Florida is that the macro view of office is disconnected from the micro performance, right? If you listen to what Brian, talked about for the last couple minutes, you don't hear anyone else, any other leasing broker, just about any market in the country, talk about their market with the dynamics and the passion that Brian just did. Right. And that's because you have what's happening on the ground is very different from the macro view of office. And therein lies the investment opportunity when you have that disconnect between the difference between the actual risk and the perceived risk in the asset class in a specific area. Getting to, your question on industrial is, clearly in a lot of southeastern markets and national markets for that matter, there is a oversupply problem, but we say it's also not a demand problem. And a great example of that is if you take the market of the industrial market of Jacksonville, which is a fantastic port. It's the number 2 vehicle port in the country. Most of our products from Latin America and Puerto Rico actually enter the country through Jacksonville. Just a fantastic port. And if you go back to 2019, we measured about 4.5 million square feet of tenant demand, new tenants in the market looking for warehouse space in Jacksonville. And then fast forward to 21 and 22, where we basically had pent up demand coming out of supply chain problems from COVID. And that number of 4.5 million square feet spiked to 12 million square feet. And so what do developers do when there's low interest rates, which there were at that time, and a ripe environment? Well, they just start building because they don't make any money if they're not building. And then what happened in 2023? Well, we saw demand come down to 6.5 million square feet. Now, if you're a developer delivering product based on demand numbers from 21 and 22, well, that's a pretty bad day in the office if you go from 12 million square feet to 6.5 million square feet of demand. But if you're an investor looking at trends and looking at, hey, in 2019, I had 4.5 million square feet of demand, but in 2023, I have 6.5 million square feet. I've had a 50% increase in demand over a 3-year, 4-year period of time. That's pretty significant. That shows a good, strong market. So it's not a demand thing, it's a supply thing. So from an investment perspective, where's the opportunity? Well, you've got a lot of developers who are sitting with empty buildings, with a lot of competition. You're playing musical chairs with a very different interest rate environment from when they delivered the building. So there's opportunities to reset basis where it costs these developers $130, $140 a square foot to deliver the building, and we're working on deals at sub $100 a square foot to buy brand new construction. And it gives a very different investment perspective because not only at that basis do we have time to wait for demand to catch up, but we also own it at a very different basis where we don't have to rent it for the same level to make a good return.
And Jason, probably a couple of years ago, very trendy and growing population markets was storage facilities. One, how are they holding up now a couple of years in? And now very trendy with the rise in AI and energy needs is data centers. How is that playing out in South Florida?
Well, look, I'm going to punt on the data center question because we get a lot from our investors to ask about data centers, and I think that's a very specialized asset class. And I protest to all of our investors that if you're investing in data centers, you need to invest with groups that have in-house engineering capabilities and understanding of how these things work. And so we don't really dabble much at all in the data center space, other than to tell you that I do think it is a good and growing sector in the market. It's just important to be investing with groups that have a real understanding and in-house engineering expertise of that. The storage space, I may roll Elliot under the bus here a little bit, but certainly that. We don't do much if any storage space, but it's something that I bet Elliot gets asked questions because if you didn't notice, we don't have basements in Florida for a very good reason. We don't have basements, but it limits your storage space, and I'd hate to show you what my garage looks like. With all the crap we have.
It has everything but cars.
Yeah. We've certainly seen a big boom of it. My sense of it is like industrial space. We're probably a little oversupplied in it with developers coming in. But Elliot, have you seen anything from your perspective that you get from your clients who what they're saying about that space?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that I dabble in quite. But I would say that, yes, I mean, because there's no basements and a lot of these homes lack storage, they're using a lot of those facilities to put things in, especially obviously the air conditioned ones because it's Florida. And most of my friends who own some of these type of facilities, they're long waiting lists, especially with the demand for all the houses that have been the last 5 years. There's a undersupply of those type of facilities. So they've been doing very well.
And Elliot, you're going to get some back-to-backs.
Sure.
What are the most significant risks facing the South Florida housing market, and how should investors and or homeowners be preparing?
So, when you use the word investor for what I do, when I listen to Brian and I listen to Jason, their analysis is very more analytical and certainly potentially less emotional. What I'm selling is different because it's a personal decision, right? Someone is at a certain stage of their life. They sold their company. They don't want to pay state income tax. They domicile in Florida, but it's not even just the tax consequences. It's a lifestyle choice. So when certain people get to a certain stage of their life, they want what they want. And I think COVID and all the, there was some very bad things because of COVID, and there were some good things. And the good things, obviously, were people reframing how they want to live their life, how they want to interact with their family, what's that going to look like. So when they look at when they can buy that type of lifestyle, that is why you've seen prices continue to go up. It's not, obviously the demand is part of that, but it's also their choices of wanting to live a certain way. And so to answer your question about what are their inherent risks, in South Florida, we don't really have as much new development. We're really running out of land. That's why you're starting to see, like when you look at Palm Beach County, we call South County and North County. So North County is Martin, is up into like Jupiter in that area and then into Martin County. So you're seeing a lot of development there. And one thing that's very interesting is you're seeing super high-end golf resorts, communities being built, some exclusively just golf and no homes, and other ones where lots are 5 to 20 million in some of these communities. And the prices of these golf memberships are, quite expensive, probably less than what some of these people are used to paying in other parts of the country, especially up north. But I don't really see a major risk right now because I think, and maybe I'm somewhat biased, people want to be in this market for so many reasons. And because of that, I don't think we're going to see much price compression at all, if any.
And I think I would have to bring up that I would assume that a risk now, partially depending on where in Florida and on the water, is going to be the insurance premiums and the impact that is going to have on buyers.
So, yes. Look, I think every market has pros and cons. And so if you want to buy in California, there's some pros, a lot of pros, and there are cons, right? So there's earthquakes could be a con, I would assume. Their tax structure is probably a con for someone who's wealthy. So Florida, we have hurricanes. They come, they go. People have a short memory. Typically, with the exception of, the devastation that happened on the west coast of Florida, with the exception of what happened with Hurricane Andrew, we haven't seen that kind of, devastation. And the codes have caught up with that to some degree over the last 25 or 30 years. But, these are just factors that people weigh. They get insurance. Is it more expensive? Yes. The wealthy are self-insuring in some cases. So I've seen that quite a bit. But that hasn't stopped people from wanting, their eye is on the prize. And this is just one of the factors that they have to consider. But what they want is superseding that issue.
And Brian, I'm going to give you a question that may play out longer term. It's going to have a negative connotation. I'm sorry. I look at an amazing American city of architecture of San Francisco. It's got technology companies. Somewhere on the back of my head has every $1 trillion company, technically including Saudi Aramco, initiated in quote unquote the West Coast, more specifically California. It has great architecture, great food, great restaurants, but it started maybe not to be everyone's political cup of tea, higher and higher taxes, and their reactions during COVID and other choices they made it less attractive. So I could have been 5 years ago, definitely 10, 15 years ago, buying properties in San Francisco thinking it's a great deal, and that has not turned out well. How could that negative scenario play out in Florida? How could investors protect themselves? I guess don't put all their eggs in one basket.
Well, I love San Francisco, one of my favorite cities in the country over a long period of time. Weather is great, the food is great, the architecture is great. And they really led the country in terms of tech tenants. They had a 3% vacant market forever and a day. 3% vacant. Anything under 10% is considered a healthy market. Okay. So the best office market in the country. You had tech tenants that took full buildings. Multiple tenants were in. There was, one tenant could be in 3 total buildings, right? We don't have anything like that in Miami. I mean, our biggest tenant in Miami is 400,000 square feet. I mean, there's one tenant of that size in all of Miami for a little over 400,000 square feet. I don't think there's even a 300,000 square foot tenant. At that point, it starts to drop. So you're talking about million square foot tenants. That market today is 45% vacant. Okay. It has gone from the best office market in the United States to the worst office market in the United States. And that happened relatively quickly. Okay.
Yes.
And I think crime is a big issue. A lot of retailers were closing up their downtown San Francisco locations because people are just busting through the glass and stealing what they want to steal. There was a football player recently who plays for the 49ers.
Yeah, he got shot.
He got shot in the middle of downtown, okay? And just, someone trying to grab his watch. So there are some cities in the United States, I don't want to pick on certain cities, but Portland, Oregon, I went out to Bend, Oregon, and there's some beautiful parts of Oregon, but Portland was scary. It was a scary city. There's people rummaging through the streets, screaming. How do you conduct business in a city like that? It's just very, very challenging. I think San Fran's got those issues to fund the police and all that. So I think they got some political issues that they have to work through, coupled with taxes as well. I mean, Miami is not known as a city where you have corporation headquarters, okay? We may get Latin American headquarters. Matter of fact, we're the second largest in the nation of Latin American headquarters behind New York City. We don't get even a lot of the regional cities. Those will go to Atlanta. So for Miami to get actual headquarter tenants is an anomaly. Since COVID, I think there's been over 15 headquarters from Citadel, Tomo Bravo, ACAP, amongst others that have relocated to South Florida. So we're in this really great position right now. What could change? I tell investors, look, if two Category 5 hurricanes came a week apart, I think you'd scare a few people out of town. All right. I lived through Hurricane Andrew. I was actually in South Miami as Hurricane Andrew came through in August of 92. That sounded like a locomotive coming through. And as you said earlier, I think, Jason, we haven't really had to deal with that, or Elliot, we haven't really had to deal with that much in the last. But if a couple of 5s came through, I think that's one thing that could really sort of hurt the migration to South Florida. We know they're coming. We can get out of the way. The fires, the mudslides, and the earthquakes of California, I think, are a little more challenging.
Of course, and only for the very brave and those that really have insight in local markets and perhaps even political sway. I could make the argument, are you buying, and I know we're talking 3,000 miles away in San Francisco, is this the bottom? Is this a dip? And if you're a long-term investor with dry powder, I don't know. I don't think I have the guts, but interesting. I'm going to ask you a back-to-back, Brian.
Well, let me just comment on that really quick, because I think that's really important to notice. I do think San Fran is a great buying opportunity right now. All those guys that went in 10 years ago, 7 years ago, 8, their basis, I'm sure, was not a great basis. But I think you could probably get in today. And I think with AI and the expansion of AI, which feels to me kind of like the computer revolution, back in the day, it just feels like. And then we talked about data centers for a quick second. I think that's real growth. Some of the articles I'm reading, AI, they are taking a lot of vacant buildings. So I think you're going to start to see that vacancy number come down. I do think San Francisco's got some nice upside right now.
I agree as an allocator, and I've spoken to multi-billion-dollar families that have the guts and some of the insight and political connections. I think that is a market longer term to look into. But if they never quite get the issue with crime solved, and that is a little debatable, then I don't know how much upside that would be relative to safer markets like where you are in Miami that you may pay a bit of a premium for, but effectively I know I'm always going to hit singles and doubles, and I don't want to wake up one day and I struck out 4 times, and that has potential to happen in our foreseeable future in San Francisco. Following up a little bit, so we spoke a little bit to you, Brian, about how, of course, downtown, about Brickell, but let's go a little further off in terms of, as an investor, could I be looking at Hollywood? Could I be looking at Fort Lauderdale? And is it worth it? Are enough people and companies moving there? And what pricing relative to, say, Brickell am I getting per square foot in a purchase?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room to grow in South Florida, right? We've got a ton of migration. Fort Lauderdale for a minute was the hole in the donut, where it was West Palm and Miami were on fire, rents going through the roof, and Fort Lauderdale was just kind of chugging along a little bit. But that's all starting to spread now. The tentacles are spreading, and Fort Lauderdale, their newest building there, the Main, is completely leased up, and there's just a recent there's going to be a recent sale of one of the Class A buildings in downtown Fort Lauderdale. So I think Fort Lauderdale is a great city. They've really done a great job in terms of the way they laid out the city, where you kind of have the bars and the restaurants to the west of downtown, and then you've got Las Olas to the east and the beach. So Fort Lauderdale's a great city, and they're going to have their day, and it's starting to come. It's just becoming a lot slower than the migration that we've seen in West Palm and in Miami. Hollywood, I've always liked Hollywood. Hollywood's like a real tweener market. Like, if I'm a tenant and I'm like, well, should I open up a Fort Lauderdale and a Miami office? Well, I could open up in Hollywood and probably achieve the
Yeah.
same thing. So yeah, I've always been a big fan of Hollywood. It's been slow growth. They've been very difficult to allow development on the beach area. The office market's kind of old and tired. There's not really been a whole lot built there in a long time. But, you know, there's an opportunity, I think, in Hollywood to sort of feed both the Dade and Broward markets.
And Jason, you're going to get what some would say it's a little bit of a complex, tough one. How do high interest rates and hyper supply impact developers and investors with floating rate debt and short-term plans? What is the impact to you from the industrial perspective?
Well, to those that are the developers, I'll answer in 2 words: not good. But from an investor's perspective, and you know, we have 2 different platforms. One that buys things opportunistically, where we're buying vacancy and playing in this world of buying empty development buildings. And then we have a more core platform where we're buying long duration in place leases. So, and the financing market for the categories are night and day, dramatically different. So on the one hand, we've got your well leased product and good eastern markets, and there's a very healthy debt market there, driven by mainly the life companies who are looking to put out long duration 5, 7, 10-year fixed rate money. We've seen those spreads over the last 12 months tighten pretty dramatically. You know, a year ago this time, we were probably doing, borrowing money at 220 over the 10-year Treasury, which, let's say that was around 6.5%. Today, we've seen that spread decrease to about 180, and we actually just got quoted on a deal to spread of 165 over. So you're inside, even though we've seen in the last 30 or 45 days a pretty big run in the treasuries, where we were playing at about a 370 10-year Treasury, and I looked earlier today, we're about a 430 Treasury. But even with that run, I mean, you're still sub 6% in that world, and that's just your basic 55 to 60% leverage from life companies, fixed rate. Now, you go to the other side of the spectrum in the opportunistic world that we play in, and there's very little traditional lenders. I would say virtually no traditional lenders lending on vacancy. So you're in the debt fund world, and then there's even, you slice that, there's the debt fund world that wants to see some leasing at the property. And then there's a much smaller segment that'll lease on or lend you money on completely vacant product. Now, we have seen the spread tightening in the debt fund space as well, and I don't want to insult my brethren in the credit world, but we saw about 18 months ago, everyone wanted to invest in credit platforms, and we just said, hey, we think there's way too much money being invested into credit right now, because it's just an overcrowding of the space, where they liked it where you were getting 450, 500 basis points spread over SOFR. So they're lending money gross at 10%, leveraging that and making 15% yields. There's so much money in that space that those spreads today are 275 over. So you're seeing that money price better. However, there is a real lack of availability of it in the marketplace. And it's really only available to, I would say, borrowers that have a real balance sheet. For example, the syndicators are just having a very, very challenging time raising money right now, because lenders don't want to lend to people that don't have a balance sheet. Because you see what's going on now, right? Borrowers that have a balance sheet can look at what's going on, say, okay, I can make the right real estate call, I can restructure my debt. And restructuring debt is just a nicer term for saying I need to put more money into the asset. But if you have no balance sheet, you have no ability to put more money into the asset and restructure debt. So the lenders, the group, the constituency that's giving lenders the most heartburn right now are syndicators that don't have a balance sheet. So you can logically understand why they don't want to lend new money to those same type of borrowers today. So you asked a complex question, so I give you a very complex answer. The
Yeah, it's a tough
financing
one.
market is very nuanced. There's places where there's plenty of relatively very good money, and there's places where it's scarce, and you have to be the perfect type of borrower to have access to that money.
I mean, kind of related to that comment and even some things you said earlier, what do you see as, from an industrial perspective, is like the sector geographically to where you're investing at the moment? Is there something that's standing out? Again, maybe 3 years ago it was storage. What is it now?
Sticking in storage, one place where we've been very active over the last few years is the cold storage market, where certainly there was a big piece written in the Wall Street Journal, and we don't do anything to that scale, but we notice we're always looking for where is there just less capital chasing it, but there's very good fundamentals for the product type, and cold is one of those places because it's from a performance standpoint, it's about as good as it gets. But from a capital standpoint, there's very little of it because it's harder to run, it's challenging to run, there's expensive components to it, i.e. a big freezer cooling system that costs a lot of money if it's not run properly and broken down. And there's very high barriers to entry because it's extremely challenging to build, not just from the expense, but from all the environmental regulations that go into putting ammonia or whatever systems to cool the space. So we've spent a lot of time in cold. We've built up a nice, small portfolio of cold storage that runs from the Carolinas down into Central Florida. It's a product type they're not building a lot of. And you look at some of these, Brian talks about the vacancy in Miami. We recently bought a cold storage property in Orlando. There's not a vacant cold storage property within 200 miles of the one that we just bought.
Wow. 200 miles.
Yeah. So you say, all right, when the tenant's up, where are they going?
Yeah. Where are they going?
Right.
Well, there's demand for it, and there's a lack of supply because of the constraints involved with building it and keeping an operation. You need a generator in case the power goes out. You don't lose all your supplies. It's a tricky part of the business.
And I would say, just like I said about data centers, we don't know much. We know what we don't know about data centers, so we don't invest in it. And I would say the same thing as cold storage. Like it's a nuanced product type, and understanding how to run it, understanding cold components. It's complex, and understanding it is the key to investing in it.
And Elliot, a little bit about what I would define as buyer demographics. So South Florida is very trendy. It's gotten, let's go with the verbiage, my words, very expensive. I could argue if you're not on the top 5 or at least 10% of income, you may have a challenge, and getting competition from Nashville, still from New York, Austin, Boston, still parts of Northern California, Southern California, and other, even ranch land in Montana. It's all effectively risen. It's a deeper societal type question, but when does it become too much? Or I could argue, we said the same thing 20, 30, 40 years ago, and we're creative, incomes rose, and we kind of figured it out.
Yeah, I cannot believe the level of wealth that is coming to our area at such a young age. We have, years ago, so I'm 58, I've been selling real estate for almost 35 years. We would have not a first-time home buyer, but a second home buyer. They would spend, I don't know, $600,000 to $700,000. They were spending $1 million. It was a lot. That same buyer now that works, is either becoming a partner or just became a partner in a big national law firm, or private equity, venture capital. They're spending $2 to $3 million. So it's really amazing, and they are coming from the feeder markets I mentioned earlier. So they're coming from California. Everything is inexpensive to them. Same thing in New York. Although I think Miami's catching up for sure. If not, they're pretty close. But our market, although it's gotten more expensive, it's definitely still less than other places. And I think even the younger affluent buyer is seeing the value of living in this type of communities, lifestyle, weather, no state income tax. They have the ability to have a hybrid working environment. Not all of them, but some of them. And some of them, in fact, I just relocated someone, worked for a large law firm in Chicago, and he opened up in Miami for a big firm. Maybe Brian leased it to them. You never
I
know.
have a feeling I did all those Chicago's, probably Kirkland Ellis.
Yeah, probably. And he's commuting. He's using the Bright Line, which is not, is certainly a solution, but it's certainly not perfect. But I think Boca and Delray and South Palm Beach County is kind of stuck in the middle. A little bit, Brian said, like for a little stuck in the middle. Boca is stuck in the middle in the sense that you don't have the traffic of Miami. You can get to either airport. And then so therefore we're seeing the demand continues. So yeah, but the wealth is interesting.
It's a great point Elliot made. What and Elliot and I, full disclosure, live in the same community. And what's shocking may be the wrong word, but it's been so eye-opening is since COVID, the amount of young people, and not just young people, but the young people that can afford to buy the home in the neighborhoods that they're purchasing in. And I go back and say, when I was 30 years old or 35 years old, there's no way I could have afforded that home that they're buying. And so, it's because they have these, great high paying jobs that are coming from other places. They're moving down here as well. And I'll tell you an interesting thing where we live, which is one of the gated country club communities in Boca Raton. They've actually started to change the rules to show you how the demographic of the club has changed, where basically the grandparents that live there can't sign their grandkids up who are non-members for the activities because there's so many new young members that have young children that need those spots. So the grandparents are up in arms because now they can't bring their grandkids in. But
These are
the young
first world
people, the
problems.
30-somethings that have moved in are taking the slot. So it's those things. And we call it in our literature the brain drain. It's not just that these young people are moving down here, but these young people who are moving down here bring an intellectual capital that we've never had in South Florida before. And these are the people who are, starting the new firms, the new businesses, the new ideas that are going to create the jobs. It's the building of roots, that these roots are relocating from other places and they're being planted here. And once the roots are planted, they're very hard to rip up and move away. For example, Elliot's daughter, and Elliot's daughter moved back from wherever she was.
She was living on Brickell.
And now lives, here in Florida again. My children, like you talk to them, where do you want to live? Well, we want to live in Florida when we're, they may want to go somewhere else. Brian's got 3 children too, and we've had these conversations. They want to move back here too. So it's these roots that are being planted that are creating an ecosystem down here. And that's why we believe, like when people say, oh, people could no one's leaving anymore. It's a root and ecosystem that's being planted that is permanent.
I got to comment on that real quick. Sorry.
Yeah, I do as well.
I just want to say one thing, for the young kids, when I say young kids, I'm talking about a couple of years out of college. Okay. So 23, 24, 25. So someone over this weekend said, hey, I want to live in this area here. And we could spend about $2 million. I want a 4-bedroom. I'm like, whoa, time out. You're not getting a 4-bedroom. You're not getting a 4-bedroom. It's $1,000 a foot. You're going to get a 2,000 square foot unit for $2 million. And they're like, what? Or you got to go west. You got to go somewhere else. So the good areas of Miami, okay, the eastern side of Miami, including Coconut Grove and Coral Gables and all that stuff down there, it's over $1,000 a foot. Mm-hmm. These kids are having a hard time purchasing their first house if they're not getting money from mom and dad to come. If you want your kid to live in South Florida, you're probably going to have to give them some money for that down payment to come live down here.
Yeah. There's one other thing that maybe pulls everything together is I'm starting to see investors that have owned real estate around the country, and let's just say in the Northeast, because that's a lot of my customers. They're now in their 80s. They're selling their properties. They have 1031 exchanges. They brought in their sons and grandchildren into the business. They want to live here. And even though they will invest in other parts of the country, some of them, not all of them naturally, like to touch and feel what they're investing in. So they're all looking, certainly like multifamily, and then I've seen some stuff into Central Florida where they're looking for industrial and warehouse, and so I'm getting those calls quite a bit.
Interesting. I mean, I would say some other factors, the stock markets have been roaring. So some that were early allocators and investors have done well. You mentioned parents or grandparents chipping in, at least for the down payment. And I know it's a little overblown and I'm looking to be a little tongue in cheek, but a degree of truth, being someone who's been active in crypto for a number of years, let's face it, a lot of the crypto bros, some of them have done incredibly well. A lot of them are in South Florida. Also, it's an attractive hub if you're hungry and want to be and successful in tech and entrepreneurship because it's favorable for business and no state tax. I'm going to ask a question, probably a little less so for Elliot, but it indirectly goes in his world a little bit, more so for Brian and Jason. And it could be a little bit of a challenging one as we take it somewhat to the home stretch, by the way, gentlemen and audience. And that is AI. I'm active in Silicon Valley. We briefly mentioned it from a different perspective in San Francisco in real estate, in public and private markets in AI, and have interviewed some leading thought leaders like Ray Kurzweil, and have come out with my own thought opinion pieces as we progress to AGI, as robotics gets better. Look at Elon and others and what they're doing in robotics. So one day, March, I won't scare you with super intelligence, but one day, is there going to be challenges for people with employment, which is maybe above and beyond the scope of our conversation today, but the long-term impact on office space and industrial may be positive for industrial. Let's call it 3 to 5 years out, mainly again for Brian and Jason. What do you think will be the impact on AI, or it's going to take longer than that to really make an impact?
Well, I think it'll take longer than that. It's so new, and all these data centers are now just getting built. But it's here. And if you don't recognize that AI is going to change business, you're literally kidding yourselves. I saw something that popped up on my Instagram the other day. It was like just talking about these marketing companies, right, that help with branding. And I mean, my God, you go on AI, it'll give you every option that you possibly want. Why are you spending this money to hire a marketing company to give you the things that you could get by just asking a question? So there are multiple types of businesses that I see. I saw something also recently, and it was this like robot in the field, and it was, I don't know, it was corn. It was one of the produce. It was picking corn. It was doing it 5 times faster than a human being can do it. It was so precise. I mean, it's here. It's coming. I don't know that 3 to 5 will change everything, but certainly over the next 10 years, there will be industries, I think, that will be extinct because of AI.
Well, I'll answer it separately for office and industrial. I think office, I'll use the term technology rather than AI. I think technology has been, for the better part of the last decade, slowly but surely reducing back office jobs. Right, things that mortgage processing, stuff like that, and just lumping AI in with technology, those jobs will become less and less. So I think our need for these large back office markets and office buildings is going to further reduce, and those type of markets will become worse and worse and more challenged and have to be repurposed. I think as you think about technology, when you talk about C-suite jobs, it only enhances the need to be able to hone that technology to be able to use it. So your urban markets or quasi-urban markets like Coral Gables and Brickell, I think will help create them to be even more vibrant. So the haves will get more, and the have-nots will get less. As it relates to industrial space, I think AI and technology is a fantastic expander of industrial space. Because if when you boil it down to what distributors are trying to do is become more efficient in delivering product. And the most, and real estate is a really relatively cheap component of the logistics process, right? It's about 4% of the cost structure. And transportation and labor makes up about 80% of it. So one of the challenges is, this is where I'd like to put a warehouse right here. This X marks the spot, but there's no labor there. So if I can then put a warehouse, and I don't need labor or need far less labor because I can use AI to do the things, or robots and technology to do the things that labor would do, that allows me to expand my real estate footprint from a deliveries perspective.
Angela, I just want to throw one thought in. I talked to someone about this recently, and like, man, that's really interesting. So imagine you've got a corporation and you got people all over the country, and you have meetings every month. You fly everyone in different cities, put them up in hotel rooms, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you're spending thousands and thousands of dollars. Okay, imagine where everybody could put on a headset and sit in a conference room, 8 to 10 people, maybe more. You could look to your right, look to your left, see everyone in the room, and have a 3-4 hour meeting where no one had to hop on a plane, no one had to check into a hotel room, you didn't have to pay for their dinners. To me, that is something that is really going to change the way business is done in terms of people traveling. That you could have this headset feel as if you're all together, and arguably be as productive as if you did have a meeting in person.
Yeah, that's a combination of the metaverse advancements that we're seeing from Zuckerberg and Meta, coupled with AI and chips and advanced technology that luckily we have no one on the panel that's in hospitality or the airline industry, because you're correct. That appears like that is going to face some challenges. But businesses are, interestingly enough, at least some of them, very resilient, and you don't know. My final round of questions, Elliot, I got to get a little creative how I play on this one for you, but thinking again of what I do, which is single family office centric, the wealthiest of the wealthy, either for themselves or from an investing perspective. I hear in South Florida, titans worth tens of billions of dollars, Bezos, Griffin, building lot after buying lot after lot after lot adjacent and effectively building a compound. I hear of Elon building a compound in Austin. So I'm talking about probably well above $100 million collective properties. Is this a trend you're seeing with the super rich? Why are they doing it? And is it impactful maybe to a small degree and growing to what you're seeing?
Well, I would say the reason they're doing it is, one, because they can. That's always one reason. I would see, look, historically in Miami, you saw that on Star Island and the islands off of Miami Beach, and
Yes.
certainly oceanfront. And we're seeing pricing at least in our area, where our direct intercoastal and oceanfront prices have doubled. We don't have 9-figure properties, but we certainly have $40-50 million properties. You are starting to see in North County, out west, more property estates being built. Not just, historically it was around equestrian, now it's going to be around golf as well. So, yes, I think there is an impact. But when those people make those type of investments, even on the business side, when they bring their people down to, what's happening in West Palm Beach or what's happening in Miami, and these large finance companies coming here, they're making a statement. And they're saying to the world, Miami's it, South Florida is it. All these restaurateurs are coming here, major food group, the list goes on. You're getting amazing restaurants all through our area. So that's supporting, the wealthy who like to dine, who like to, all the leisure things. Look at what's happened to the Boca Raton with Michael, Waddell's investment group. They've transformed that resort to next level. And I forget who owned it before, but they didn't do very much with it except lipsticked it. Now it's like, it's nice of a resort that you can go to in the country.
100%.
So the beneficiaries of that, people who can join that from this area can enjoy that. So that's, what I've seen happen.
Bezos spent $230 million buying 3 lots in Indian Creek. Okay, and then you had Ken Griffin bought
Ken Griffin,
Adrian Art's house for $100 million. He's already spent $1 billion on real estate down here since COVID. So I think what it does tell you is that, you know, they're here to stay, right? They're not like just doing a little fixer upper. Like they're building their compound because they plan on planting a flag here and staying for a long period of time.
100%. As someone who's very active in that space, and talks about things like sovereign risk, state opportunities, protection, a variety of different factors that real estate as a hands-on, for lack of a better word, asset. I talk about things like gold, like certain kinds of real estate, including compounds that these are things, sports teams, these are things that I see. And I know I'm talking rarefied air here, probably not even billionaires, but deca billionaires and up. What surprises a lot of people when I ask them the bottom number 400 of the Forbes 400, maybe it changed in the last month, how much do you think their net worth is? Almost everyone says 1.5, 2 billion. It's like 7.4 billion. There's a lot of, and you guys hinted at it earlier with the surprise of people driving things up. There's a lot now. Again, I know some of you are going to write back on societal issues. This is a challenge. I don't totally disagree with you. A subject for a different time. I guess my final question to both related to that I asked Elliot, to Brian and Jason is, okay, if I'm a single family office, Brian, I think you laid out the case for the market is booming. There's some A++ markets like Brickell and maybe opportunities in areas like Hollywood and others. How should I look at it from an investing perspective?
So I have two sort of boutique buildings that one's on South Beach called the Fifth, super high end office building that, you know, we're looking at like 150, 160 triple net rents. So 180, 190, right? And then in Bay Harbor, we're just launching a brand new building in Bay Harbor that's around the same thing, 140, 150 triple net, right? So you've got these huge rents in these little sort of boutique buildings, okay? And if you're talking about your clients investing in office, is that sort of, Angela, the question?
Yes.
Like, okay, so having those guys invest in office, I mean, we're in a bubble down here, and I don't mean a bubble that's gonna like burst. We're a small tenant market that's just had a bunch of migration. I don't foresee anything over the next decade in terms of, just because there's just more migration. Even friends in New York who, you know, weren't the ultra rich are still making their way down here, right? They couldn't just pick up in the first couple of years, just like the ultra rich could do. So we're still seeing it. I mean, I think investing in high quality areas that have migration, that are not commodity office, old, you know, low window, or excuse me, small windows, low ceilings, the high end stuff with the balconies in the good locations, the walkable locations, I think for the next 10 years are going to boom.
Excellent. And Jason, you're going to get that same question, and you're going to have the additional of industrial is so well known now in the right markets to be very trendy and hot with family offices. And besides just an outright purchase, your focus is going to be on more of the being more passive as an LP. So it's not necessarily going to take a block of 10, 30, 40, 50, 100 million. Talk about the opportunity from a ultra high net worth investor or family office perspective.
Well, I think, you know, over the last 30, I'll step back a little bit in answering this question. And in my career in real estate, going back almost 30 years, you saw real estate change from an operating asset class to a financial instrument. And we've had two pretty recent cycles of what happens when you invest in it like a financial instrument, the financial crisis, and then the current inflation environment that caused interest rates to go up by 500 basis points. And I think as an investor, you need to start with it from looking at it as an operating asset class and investing through it with people who can and understand how to operate it and how to generate return through efficient operations. Use the financial aspect of leverage as a way to enhance those returns, but not as the primary component of returns. So that's even what Brian's saying here, even to play in the office world, it's investing with the local people in these markets who understand how to operate and how to take advantage of the anomalies in some of the market and know where the grenades are and where they're not, and where to step. I think, both in office in South Florida, there's a very compelling opportunistic investment opportunity. And I think in the industrial space, we have a long-term thematic investment opportunity that tells a story of a expanding industrial environment, which has really far much less to do with how much we consume, but by a shift in the way we consume, right? So it's very compelling when you say, hey, if we don't spend as a country $1 more on goods next year, but we just move from 23% of the goods we buy through e-commerce to 25%, you have tens and tens of billions of square feet of new industrial demand just generating from that. And it's probably the one of the only asset class where you've actually had the cost of capital go up, consumer sentiment go down, but demand for the asset go up. Right? And that's because we don't need people to spend more money for it to generate demand for space. We just need people to say, oh, you know what, this year I'm going to buy a little more online, and I'm going to buy a little more online, I'm going to buy a little more online. And that's really in its simplest form what's happening. It's a great thematic investment, and we're certainly long it and bullish on it.
Of course. And Elliot, for those that would like to learn more about you and your practice, how could they research a website, a way to contact you and your team?
Sure. No, that's great. Yeah. So the best is to go on Koolik.com, Koolik.com. And you can learn all about our family, our business, and then obviously all my contact information is there. So thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And again, everyone, that's Koolik, Koolik.com. And Brian, how about you?
Back of a milk carton, you'll find me most likely. Missing. No, you can just shoot me an email at brian.gale@cushwake.com, and I'd be happy to, reach back out to you and give you whatever information you're looking for.
And Mr. Isaacson, how about you?
Sure. You can either just simply email me at jason@ipcappartners.com, or you can also do it through our website, which is ipcappartners.com.
Great. And I have a couple of quick closing announcements, everyone, including with the session that I did here. First of all, those of you that will hear this before 11:14 or maybe that morning, I will be hosting an event in New York City with Jason. If you're an ultra high net worth investor, real estate investor, or family office, have a chance to reach out to me directly to interact over a wonderful private room with deep and intense discussions and engagement on the great subject of real estate. I hope to do something with Jason as well, possibly in Palm Beach before the year ends. So do have an opportunity to reach out to me directly. What I will add in anything that has some element of an investment discussion, a reminder. Today happens to be, kind of a pretty interesting day, or at least this week. It's Monday, 11/4. You may hear this a year from now, 10 years from now. I don't know. And conditions change. So if you are an investor, do understand everyone has different risk tolerances, different liquidity needs. Conditions change. This is for engagement and entertainment purposes. And anything relative to investing, you need to think for yourself, make your own decisions, and very importantly, when you invest, sadly, sometimes you can lose money. So do understand that. My close, I've done hundreds of programs, actually both in person and digitally. I have not done enough when it comes to real estate. So I'm glad that Jason and the team had a chance to reach out. I look to do much more moving forward. It is, if I could call it, an alternative asset class. Some would debate that and say it's a core traditional, but it would easily be the most common among the super rich to have an allocation to. So Today was an interesting chance to hear about it from a home and, or as we heard at the end, a compound perspective, to hear about it from an office, which could be for a business or family office use, but from an investing perspective too. And the same with industrial, which has probably been the hottest of the real estate opportunities, and both from an opportunity of needing it from literally business interest as well as investing, either purposely, directly in total, or as an LP, a more passive investor. So understanding and doing more in education and opportunities in real estate is absolutely something I would like to be more active in. I think we went down an interesting road in the hottest of markets, which is South Florida, and also a little bit of a curveball for some of you with some of our unique opinions relative to 3,000 miles away in San Francisco. So probably more on that and other markets coming up. Again, I do encourage you to keep an open mind, to research, to learn more. And if you're a family office, this real estate effectively for so many of you is an anchor in what you do. And I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you'd like to learn more about the work that I do, which some of it is public in my @Family Office and @Family Office TV, and I'm happy to do that. My members usually, like in this case, get first access, opportunity to interact live most of the time. And the opportunity to get a head start that could be up to a month or longer. And not everything I do makes it publicly. There's some private programs that I do. I also do in-person programs and probably output more white papers and content than I think anyone else in the community. Go to angelorobles.com. My name, it's really easy, angelorobles.com, and look at joining, being a member at SFO Continuity, my private club to real allocators and family offices, and some of the other work that I do on the more consultative and masterclass. It's all up there at angelorobles.com. On that note, thank you, everyone. I know Elliot had a run. He did a great job. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jason, for putting this all together. I'll obviously see you hopefully a couple of times, and maybe with some of you out in the audience joining me and Jason as well. And if there was any confusion or questions regarding interaction or wanting a connection to one of the guests, just simply let me know. Angelo at angelorobles.com. Gentlemen, again, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Angelo.
Thank you, Angelo.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank
Pleasure.
you.
Thank you.